Marvel Comics writer Dan Slott, who is currently writing Superior Spider-Man and Spider-Boy, recently made the absolutely bizarre and false claim that it's, quote, it's impossible to ruin, destroy a long-standing legacy character. If an iconic character's been around for 50 plus years, they're indestructible. Whatever current aspect storyline displeases you as a fan can be hand-waved away down the road. The character you love will be fine. I think this is absolutely false. We're going to get into his explanation. He does go into like a number of other tweets here explaining this idea, but I think he's absolutely wrong. I think you can see the evidence around you. You can see that Star Wars has completely been tarnished. You can look at the box office returns. You can probably look at toy sales. You can indeed destroy a long-standing legacy of a character when you turn someone like Luke Skywalker into someone who is contemplating murdering his nephew. You can indeed do that. I think that Spider-Man is also an example, especially for comic book readers. The idea that Mephisto would break up the marriage between Mary Jane, I think that did indeed tarnish a lot of people, and they stopped buying Spider-Man comics after that. But let's go into more of his argument here. He says, but what if I don't want to wait that long? If a legacy character has been around for 50 plus years, chances are good that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of stories about them in various media you haven't read, seen, experienced yet. More than enough to tide you over. That is true, but again, that is under the assumption that you can't tarnish the legacy, and I think he's absolutely wrong here. That's not how the human psyche works. If you fundamentally destroy a character in a certain medium, I think it'd be really hard to kind of pick that back up. I mean, we have so many people just talking about this, how they just completely abandoned Star Wars after The Last Jedi, and then even more abandoned after The Rise of Skywalker, and then we're seeing even more and more and more abandoned after Obi-Wan Kenobi, and you can see this in the Nielsen numbers. Way less viewership from Obi-Wan Kenobi to Ahsoka, even to The Mandalorian. You see massive drop in The Mandalorian as well. Obviously, that Mandalorian hasn't been around for 50 plus years, but the Star Wars franchise has been. So I think he's operating here under a false assumption. Then he goes on and says, but the current storyline hurts and disrespects the character. I'm defending them. For a character to stay vital fresh, especially one that's been around for 50 plus years, storytellers have to take risks and try things that haven't been done with that character before. That kind of contradicts what he said here, right? If a legacy character has been around for 50 plus years, chances are good that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of stories about them in various media you haven't read, seen, experienced yet. If that's the case, then why would you have to do some kind of massive risk and radically alter and change the character that could indeed ruin, destroy the character's long-standing legacy? So he's a little bit contradictory there. I don't think he is really firing on all wires here. Doesn't really make any sense. I don't think he thought this through a lot. Ridiculous. I think you can still tell strong stories and keeping the character true to its core. I think there is nothing wrong with telling stories like that. And I would also argue that the best stories about these characters, and the reason why a lot of these characters have been really strong, is that the stories that are being told stay true to the character. He goes on and says, and whenever that happens, whatever ways those stories deviate from the normal, inevitably upset a number of the hardcore fans. Conversely, they could also excite other parts of the base and catch the attention of new fans. Again, massive, massive assumptions, or it could just completely die and wither away and actually tarnish the character's legacy, and no one ends up reading it whatsoever. Your book gets canceled. The character gets shelved. We have indeed seen this. There's lots of evidence disproving everything this guy is writing here. It's just absolutely wild that he's buying into this here. He says these deviations are necessary time to time. He says without these wild swings and stories that take big risks, there'd be the danger of the property growing stale and predictable. That's not true. A good storyteller can obviously put the character into different situations and things like that without fundamentally altering the character. That's just absolutely not true whatsoever. You do not have to fundamentally alter the character and take wild swings to prevent stories from getting stale and predictable. This is all just him justifying his trash writing at this point now. And he goes again and he says, and again, for a character to have survived so long, there's the knowledge a reboot, reinvention, or handwave could put all the toys back in the box. Despite any histrionics, there's always the knowledge that the fan base that existed before you felt the exact same way over a previous story or status quo. And guess what? That character we all know and love is still here and still thriving. They're going to be okay. He doesn't provide any examples whatsoever to prove his point. So I think he needs to prove that. He needs to provide evidence of his argument. He doesn't provide any. This is just an opinion that he's giving. I think there's evidence contrary to this. Again, I've already pointed to Luke Skywalker. I can point to Obi-Wan Kenobi. I think those are very front and center examples. I think you can point to Han Solo as well. So yeah. Then he concludes here. He says, also, if you think storyline has broken your favorite character for all time and you can't come up with an idea for a story that fixed that, then your fan powers are lacking. So he actually is now blaming you for what someone else did in a terrible story. You are the one who needs to create in your own headcanon a way to fix someone else who has fundamentally turned Luke Skywalker into someone who is contemplating murdering his nephew. I think it's I'm gonna butcher this. I'm off the cuff here. Tarzan is a perfect example. They adapted that character into a different medium and they completely ruined who he was. They turned him into this idiot character, and that is now what people think of when they think of Tarzan. Another example that just proves everything Dan Slott is saying here. But he goes on, he says, because I guarantee you there are hundreds, if not thousands of fans who can come up with a fix. Sure, like if you wanted to fix Luke Skywalker, you can create a story that can potentially rewrite him wanting to murder his nephew, giving up the Force, and all of that stuff. But that also, again, it doesn't erase what Rian Johnson and Lucasfilm did. That still exists. It's still a tarnish on Luke Skywalker's character. And again, like I said, people have walked away because they do not want to see Luke Skywalker like that. You've already done that to them. Again, disproves his point. And the idea that the fans have to be able to do this is just wrong. They shouldn't have done it in the first place. And then what's hilarious here is Emmy the Vampire Slayer says, Marvel managed to do this with Spider-Man when they made One More Day, The Amazing Spider, Teenager Forever. So they're like, yeah, you're wrong. Here's evidence. And then Dan Slott says, impossible, because a fan told me Marvel had already managed to do that with the Clone Saga. So again, but he's not disproving it. Like, he's saying it's impossible, but then he's saying that another person had already said that Marvel did that with the Clone Saga and that they noped out, right? Like, so for that person, it did tarnish that character's legacy, and they abandoned Spider-Man. For Emmy the Vampire Slayer, the One More Day story did indeed tarnish the legacy of Spider-Man, and they no longer are as heavily involved or are reading Spider-Man books for now. I'm making assumptions here. I don't know. I'm saying, based off what this person is saying, I'm making some assumptions here. And then he says, when I got in my time machine, another fan told me Marvel managed to do that with the death of Gwen Stacy and so on. It's amazing how many times Marvel has managed to do this. And this is what the real issue here with Dan Slott. He doesn't understand that he's talking to different people, and that just because different people have different jumping off points on where the character's legacy being tarnished is at does not actually validate his opinion. In fact, it actually invalidates it, because it does indeed prove that certain storylines can indeed tarnish a character's legacy, especially when you look at an individual level. So this guy clearly has no idea really what he is talking about whatsoever. He's contradicting himself in nearly every single tweet, and there's a plethora of evidence that disproves everything he is saying here. But again, this is Dan Slott. This is the people that Marvel hired. Canon doesn't matter. Don't immerse yourself whatsoever at all. We're just going to ignore the entire idea of fairy stories and how they operate and how the human psyche works and how stories work, and just hand wave it all away and ignore it. Well, that's not how it works. J.R. Tolkien makes this very clear. If you lose immersion, you're now only looking at an aborted project, and you're looking at it from the outside. He's well documented this on Fairy Stories, and Dan Slott is trying to disprove it here on Twitter. I'm going to go with J.R. Tolkien on this. I think he knows what he's talking about compared to someone like Dan Slott. But let me know what you think in the comments below.
Subscribe for more.